As part of her fantastically exciting job, Andrea travels the globe, and what she does is she scours different countries in pursuit of her passion, which is all about forecasting. So a very different session today, something a little more fun, something a little bit more bright as we're slowly coming out of lockdown. We've done enough mental health, we've done enough analysis of ourselves in terms of how we react to the conditions around us. We are looking today to the future. It's bright, it could well be orange, who knows? But what Andrea will be doing is sharing some tips on technical colour with you all, on how colours can differ so dramatically with light and also with surrounding colour. So Andrea is going to talk about how colour can affect our mood, how colour can affect the connections to a space, how it can trigger memory and invoke emotion. But ultimately, she wants to share the importance of colour undertones in paint, as this is an area that affects so many professionals when specifying what the interior and indeed the exterior of architectural builds look like. So we're really pleased to have you with us today, Andrea. Welcome aboard to one of our fantastic lean-ins, and of course to all 260 of you who are going to join us today on this lean-in, a very warm welcome back. Great to see so many of you frequent lean-ins. So without further ado, Andrea, we'd like to pass over to you. Welcome to the Institute of Architects, and give us an overview of Dulux.
Thanks, Michael, and welcome everyone today. So basically, obviously, colour is a very important part of what we do whenever we are specifying. And I know just from my experience, I mean, I'm an interior designer by trade, and certainly I know how much my clients always struggled when choosing colour with undertones. And of course, paint is renowned to having tint, and of course with tint it means that you'll get many undertones in sometimes the simplest of colours as well, especially when you're talking whites and neutrals, especially our complex neutrals. So, so my passion is obviously colour forecasting, and we are currently working on the 2021 colour forecast, which is no easy feat in the current environment, of course, especially with Milan being cancelled. But the great thing is we have a lot of online forums that we are a part of. One is Colour Marketing Group. We've actually been having virtual colour meetings, which has been fantastic. And of course, a lot of the international design community have been launching online as well. So we've been spending a lot of time online, like most of you I'm sure have at the moment as well. And it's been really fascinating, actually, such a different way of learning, but it's been terrific just the same. So today, I suppose what I really wanted to inform the community was just the difference colour can be perceived, so the appearance can be perceived purely on changing light and also surrounding colour. So the presentation that I'm going to be going through today, I'm not going to be concentrating on hue and chroma or any of those sorts of things. I really want to concentrate on lighting and undertones, because I know just from dealing with architects around the country already, that is an area that often becomes an issue on a specification, especially when you're trying to match in with other surfaces such as laminates and textiles and other materials. So I will be going through this presentation, and hopefully you'll have lots of questions for me at the end. So we're going to start with our presentation on Dulux Colour. And as I say, as we're going through this, I will also talk about the mood and connection to the space, because I think that is extremely important, especially when you're trying to create something on behalf of a client or client base. So one of the things that we will be talking about is how colour can transform. And of course, this is just a very simple studio shot that we did a number of years ago, but it's a really powerful one because it shows you in the same space, just by doing one colour in a light variation versus a very deep variation. So on the left, we have a beautiful colour, which is called terrace white, which is one of our grazes, if you like. And on the right, we have a beautiful charcoal called Baltica, which has a gorgeous blue undertone. And that's the beauty of when you're dealing with anything that is in the neutral realm, you will always get undertones. A lot of our greys, beiges, all of those sorts of neutrals will always have undertones. And just to give you just a very simplistic example, a very popular colour at the moment is Tranquil Retreat. actually, Michael has got Tranquil Retreat on his home exterior. So Tranquil Retreat is quite a complex colour. Now, when you're viewing that in the right lighting conditions, you'll see it's a really beautiful warm grey or a greyish. When we're looking at the tint formulation for that, we can actually see it's made up of things like ochre. It has a little bit of black as well. It also has a little bit of red oxide. So already you can start to see how these undertones can come through purely from the tint involved. So this is a really important area. So I'm not going to go through the dimensions of colour today because I'm sure a lot of you are already very familiar with that. I can certainly do that at another session if that's something that you would be interested in as well. But today we really want to concentrate on undertones and lighting when it comes to colour perception. So if any of you have our Dulux Watercolour 2 Atlas, you would know that when you're looking at tones and shades, it's a really easy way to see it when you're looking at the Atlas. And certainly when I go through this presentation in person, I normally hold my Atlas up and I would be showing you exactly how the tone and shade work in our Atlas, because it's a really great tool to give you those broken down variations of shade and tone. But of course, when you're looking at tone, it's all about the lightness or darkness. We can add beautiful mood and atmosphere by changing tone. So by darkening a colour, it's amazing how you can add a dramatic feel. It can make the space feel quite cosy, especially for retail and restaurants sort of areas, cafes. It's a really great mood, makes great mood perception as well. So we use mood a lot when we're designing spaces, and as I said, especially commercially, we use it probably even more than residentially. So the other area that we use is a reduced chroma. Now, you might know these as muted colours or certainly grayed off colours. You probably hear a lot of people talking about as well. But when we're talking about reduced chroma, it is really just colours that have a lot of black as in the tint as well. So you're really taking that true chromatic cleanness, I suppose, or brightness out of the colour, and it's very subdued and very calm. So these colours are often used in residential spaces, but they're also great for commercial spaces as well, when you really want to have a very calm and serene environment. By adding those beautiful muted tones, obviously it will already give you that mood. Colour temperature, I mean, obviously you all know that a lot of colours, we basically pretty much have cool or warm variants in colour, and the degree obviously will depend on whether it is a muted or a chromatic colour. But where I really want to concentrate on today is talking about our neutrals and whites, because I know this is an area that we work in a lot, and it's probably the most complex area when you're talking about undertones. So where paint plays a lot in this space is this new neutral area, which is a range of whites, beiges, browns, greys, beiges, all of those sorts of colours that are made up of quite a number of tints. So looking at undertones, what is an undertone? An undertone is simply, it's another colour coming through a mass colour. So the mass colour is the predominant colour. So we're talking about a colour such as Sago Quarter, just on the screen now. So Sago Quarter, if anyone's ever used Sago, it's a really beautiful, warm neutral, almost has like a pinkish sort of undertone. Once again, it's quite a complex undertone, but you'll notice that when you look at the tint formulation, it does have a lot of red oxide in it and also a lot of ochre. So hence it does give you the warm sort of feeling, and it will project either ochre, so yellowish, or pinkish from the red tinter. So once again, depending on light and surrounding colour, any of these undertones or all of the undertones can come through. So on the left here, we have hog bristle. Once again, it's quite a complex neutral. It's a really beautiful, it's under our whites, if you like, but it is quite a dark white. And the white is made up of ochre. It's got a little bit of black, which is always good for opacity. And of course, a little bit of red. So this is a really popular colour both in the residential realm, but also with browns coming back as a base again in our forecasting, you'll find that more and more of these warm whites and beiges will come back in time as well. On the right-hand side, we have a really gorgeous charcoal called Fair Oaks. This particular shot was taken a couple of years ago in one of our colour forecast photography shoots. It's a beautiful, complex charcoal because it has a very striking olive undertone. So in particular, like this particular shoot was done with easterly sun, so it was in a morning shoot. And it was actually quite clear. You could really see that olive tone coming through. By the end of the day, when we were actually photographing other rooms in this home, you couldn't really see the undertone of the olive at all. And that is the beauty of these complex colours. So as soon as you're starting to build on these, they will change depending on the light and the time of day, obviously. It's the same with exterior. Actually, exterior is probably even more dramatic because of the illuminant level or the lux levels. On a sunny day, you could be looking at 10,000 lighting levels, lux levels, whereas interior, you're probably talking between 400 and 600 normally. So the difference that it makes to a colour is really very, very dramatic. And colours that, you know, are quite probably mid-tone can often be washed out to almost looking like white in direct sun. So it is a really important area as well. So obviously exterior colours can also be rolled into the warm and the cool space. And it's a really great, easy place to start with a client as well. So this is why our undertones are so complex. You have a range of different undertones, obviously those warm neutrals, the beiges and greys. You have the red-pink undertone, the yellow-orange, and of course that greenish undertone. And of course on the cool realm, you have that blue tone, that mauve. You often, when people are using greys, they will talk about, I can see it's got a mauve undertone. And certainly green can fit into both warm and cool, understanding with that yellowness of the green as well. And of course, whites can have all of the above. So how do we identify undertones? This is probably one of the hardest areas. For those of you that have the Atlas, it's actually a really good area of understanding how undertones work. Seeing the lightness and darkness of one particular column can help you understand how that formulation is made up. The other areas, you can actually ring customer service. You can always ring our 132525 number or go on our specify website and speak to one of our specification reps online and ask them what the tint formulation is. You know, we're not KFC. We don't say that our formulas are secret. You can actually find out what that formula is made up of. It's a really important thing. If you've got a complex neutral in particular or a complex colour just generally, by understanding the tint formulation, it really does help you understand what will be that predominant undertone in the space. The other area is comparing. So you can compare different neutrals. So if you've got some A4 samples and you've got Sandy Day and you've got Grand Piano and you've got Beige Royale, you can look at those colours together. That will tell you straight away visually what the predominant undertone is on those colours. If you look at them separately, you probably won't be able to tell so much, but as soon as you put them together, it will really come through. And it's the same with whites as well. So as I mentioned, A4 swatches are really important in this space, and I know a lot of you have access to these, which is a great service and obviously has continued right throughout this area of the coronavirus lockdown. So A4 swatches are a fantastic tool. Also understanding what the other materials you're using in that space. You know, so if it's a hotel complex and you've got many, many materials, you really need to do those mood boards. And I'm sure a lot of you are already doing that. I suppose the benefit of understanding what way the lighting is will really also help you understand what undertones will be projected in that space as well. So keeping, to create schemes, obviously keeping undertones the same is probably what most of us would do. So keeping in one column of the Atlas. Leveraging complementary colours is another easy way to build on that scheme, even if you're keeping in a very neutral sort of stance. And of course, we can always vary our tonal levels, but also our finishes. So if you wanted to make a little bit of a variation, you can always pick up your gloss levels in paint and use a matte with a gloss, for example, even in the same colour, because they will always appear differently in visual effect. So just in summary, we have our undertones for beiges and of course our greys, and you can see importantly that you do get in greys that purple or red undertone. You can also in beiges, you can get that beautiful red, and that gives you that warmth in the beiges as well. Green goes across both areas, but of course whites, you can have all of the above. And this is why some of the whites actually was on our help and advice line talking to an architect the other day, and the architect was using a colour, and when I looked at it, it was a white, and it had 4 tints in it. So this is why these areas can be quite complex. So comparing these with other whites or other neutrals is a really important thing. And I know if any of you do have the atlas, you have the isolation window in the front of your atlas. It has a grey back on one side, and it also has a white back on the other side. You can use either of those. I personally prefer the grey because it is a base grey and it will show you the undertone more easily. Well, I see the undertone easily with the grey, but some people prefer the white. Both are fine. It's whatever you prefer. So lighting, obviously to perceive colour, we have to have light. There's no two ways about it. So both natural and artificial light hugely impact how we view colour. And I mentioned before about the lux levels on the exterior can be up to 10,000. So, this is a massive variation on how we actually view, and importantly, how our clients view colour. And I think that is a really important thing because not all of us view colour in the same way. Natural light, let me just take you on a very quick projection through how light, the way that the aspect that we face actually differs the light and how it can change the perception of the colour. So on the eastern side, we have a strong morning light, which is a yellowish tone. On the northern light is our most neutral light. So if you were to try and do the most accurate light, always northern light is the best. And when we're looking at our light boxes, when we're doing any of our colour work in our labs, obviously that is our most neutral light that we use, that northern light. Or you'll also hear it as daylight, and you can always get daylight tubes as well if you're working with any artificial lighting inside, and I highly recommend that as well. So southern light can be a diffuse light, so it has like that coolish blue tone. Often people will say to me, oh, should I just use a white in a south facing room because it's really dark and I want it to be bright. The most important thing is that when you're using colour in a southern space, try and warm it up a little bit because it automatically has that bluish tone. So as long as you warm it up to something like, even if you're using a white, you would go natural white or you would go whisper white, something with that little bit more hint of warmth. It will still look white in that space, but it won't look drab. And that's the problem. If you start using colours like Lexicon or white on white or something like that in those spaces, it can look a little bit dull, and it is that light that's affecting it. The western light is obviously the strong light at the end of the day, that orange sort of red light. And just to give you an example, we did a forecast shoot a couple of years ago. It was the front of a beautiful Victorian home. It was done on a winter's day in Melbourne. Was like 5:30 at night, sort of the end of the day, and the colour that we used on the front door was Indian red, which is a really beautiful mid-base brown. Now, when that was shot, it actually looked like it was a metallic door, almost like rose gold. It was incredible, and it was purely the light that made that variation of colour. So really you can really use light as a bit of a power phase, if you like, in your project as well. From an exterior perspective, shadows can completely change the look and feel of a particular element on the exterior. So in this particular case, you can see the post there on this weatherboard home. You can see it in direct light. I think the colour is actually called Columbia, which is a beautiful sort of grey-based brown. And you can see it in shadow. They look like two completely different colours. So it is really amazing how colour is so impacted by light. It's the same on the interior as well. Now, this is an old Dulux colour. It's a colour that actually we still have an atlas today. It's not used a lot these days. It's called Chalk USA. It's a beautiful, warm, rich, sort of creamy white. Now, Chalk USA, here you can see it next to the window space where you're getting the most natural light. It looks white. It's a warm white. Then you can see as we go on the left of the screen, you'll see that we've put sort of colour chips sort of to match how the visual appearance looks in the shadow. So you can see where the actual lighting is, the artificial lighting in that hallway in the background on the ground floor. You'll see it almost looks like brown on the base and almost caramel on that top part of the wall. Then when you go up further, you've got more of a brown on the ceiling face because you've got that diffused light. On that, on the first floor, you almost have like a soft grey. And then where there's no light penetrating at all, of course, it looks black. So that one space can have 6 different colours. And that is the impact of lighting on colour. It is quite dramatic. The other thing I wanted to talk about today, and this is a really important tool, this shows you how colour is affected by surrounding colour. And surrounding colour could be simply other surface materials that you're using. It might be drapery, it might be carpets, it might be furniture, anything that is in that space that can change the appearance of that colour. So you can see here on the yellow, with the yellow background colour, and you've got the orange sort of outlay, that colour in the centre, it almost has like a grey-green inference. So a grey-green inference. And then on the right-hand side with that blue, you'll see that you've got almost like a violet inlay as well. And then in the centre, you've got quite a bright green, well, it's still muted, of course, but it has like a much more of a green appearance versus a grey, blue-green appearance on the yellow side. Now, if I click on this, you'll see these colours are exactly the same. So just that background colour, the influence it makes is just absolutely incredible. So this is the impact and the appearance of light and surrounding colour on colour. We have another example here. We have on the left, we have the yellow background, and then we have on the right-hand side, we have the blue background once again. On the left-hand side, you'll see that the violet colour is much less muted, so it's more deeper and it has more of a, I suppose, a more truer violet colour visual appeal. On the right-hand side, it's much more muted, almost more pink as well. And you'll find, let me click on this, it is the same colour. So once again, it's the miraculous scientific side of colour that can appear very differently. Now, this is not as dramatic with our greys, but it's also important to understand that even when you're talking about neutral colours or, you know, black and white variations, it will still have a different effect. So when we're looking at these circles, you obviously start from a much darker grey, and then you have variances of greys going to very light grey at the very end. So when we're visually looking at that light grey on a dark background, you'll see that obviously that circle looks quite light. When we go to the far right and we see that lighter colour background with that circle, the circle looks quite dark in comparison to how it visually looks in the very first square. So when I click on this, you will see that these circles are all the same tone. So it just shows you the power of that background surrounding colour. Now, the perception of colour, once again, on shadow is really, really fascinating as well. And I know, you know, we show you that exterior image, which really gave a great example of those posts and how they can look in direct sunlight versus shadow. If we look at the A and B squares on this checkerboard, you'll see that the A looks like a darker grey and the B looks like almost like a white. And here we have this cylinder, this green cylinder, which is casting this shadow on this checkerboard. When I click on this, you will see that the A and B are actually the same tone, and it's purely the shadow which is changing the way it visually looks. So this is why shadow lines are really important, especially when you're doing really large projects. So how can we help you with the visual look and understanding undertones and obviously how surrounding colours impact colour? Well, as I said before, A4 colour swatches are really, really important. Obviously, you can always look at our website. Our website has the full colour atlas. So even if you don't own an atlas, you might just have a fan deck. The full atlas is always available on our specifier website. And you can look at each column and see how tones and shades are affected. We also have a white spandex. This is a white spandex we've had in our marketplace for a number of years, and it's still really valid. It has some fantastic colours, but importantly has full leaf samples of the colour. So they're a really great tool if you have to go on site. It's a small spandex to handle, very easy to use. We also obviously have our World of Colour Atlas and Fandeck I mentioned before. And also our specification reps are, absolute amazing knowledge. They are fantastic in this area. They can also help you with colour tint formulations if you really need to understand the complexity around the tint strength of that colour as well. I mentioned the whites and neutrals Fandeck. These are available, I think, on our online shop, and I think they're around the $10 mark. They're the absolutely fantastic tool. I think I use mine every day. It's amazing. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today when it comes to understanding undertones and importantly understanding how light impacts on colour. And hopefully I can actually go through some questions with you today.
Thank you very much, Andrea. That was really fascinating. You could, to be honest, I could watch you put that shadow in front of that different colour all day long. It's absolutely fascinating. I didn't realise that there was such a marked difference with shadow. And as you well know, having currently repainting my house, I'm reconsidering some of the colours that I've got. We have had a whole lot of questions to you, Andrea, and thank you very much for everybody on the call for your questions that you've sent through. I suppose the first question I've got, is there a global on-trend colour palette at the moment, or is it continually emerging? Are you seeing anything different in 2020?
Well, we're actually we're projecting now to 2021. So our 2020 forecast is out in the market, and we have some fantastic visual images on our specifier website. So if anyone would like to see that, that is available now in the form of an e-magazine. We also, when we're doing our presentations to media and also to our specifier community, we always talk about the main shifts in colour. And when we're looking, last year was a really big shift because we really saw the predominance of the browns coming through. So where we had the grey base over the last probably decade, if you like, the last couple of years, we're starting to see that changing. And we're really starting to see those browns becoming quite a dominant force in undertone. Now, I'm not saying greys are going, they're not going, but what they're doing is they're bringing on a new feel. So you don't have to worry because your tranquil retreat and your colours have still got undertones and they're more on the warmer side as well. So that's what we're seeing where colour is going. It is definitely warming up with that browner undertone, and you'll notice that a lot of the big furniture manufacturers, even things like, leather sofas, we're starting to see those beautiful tans, the camel, the dark sort of toffee browns, if you like, coming through again, rather than seeing black. Not saying black's going, it will always be there in that sort of material. But it's just important to see how things change, where we may have been in more the mid-grey, light grey 5 years ago. That's where you're seeing that big colour shift.
I want to talk about globalisation because in terms of trade impacts, I mean, how will trade impacts that we've seen, especially between Australia and China, we've escalated trade issues with China. In respect to sourcing, I know that you get a lot of your pigments from the Far East and also from Asia as well. I mean, since you parted ways with DGL Group in China, do you see any problems for sourcing pigments from overseas locations?
No, well, I mean, luckily we are part of Nippon, so obviously that's a very large paint manufacturer around the world. And so we don't actually see any issues with pigments. I suppose the biggest area of issue, and I had a meeting online with a university in Melbourne the other night on a committee there, and we were talking about just issues with textiles coming from overseas and materials coming from overseas at the moment. So paint's probably, we're in a bit of a lucky space because one, we manufacture here, but they were talking about the issue with freight and how because we are in many planes flying at the moment, everyone is relying on sea freight, and the cost of freight has significantly increased as well. So I think obviously from an architectural perspective, there'll definitely be delays in product and materials. And certainly talking to a couple of the architects online the other night, they were already seeing that and seeing that they had to increase their freight costs to clients as well.
Great answer. Thank you for that. A question from Anna, who's on the chat, and she's working in aged care. And so she's asked a really fascinating question. I'm interested to know what the answer is. In terms of aged care, what is the most appropriate range of colours that you would recommend for the development of an architect developing an aged care facility, you know, in terms of affecting residents positively and being able to alter people's moods? What's your recommendation?
We've done a lot of work in this area, as you can imagine. It's a real growth area. We had a fantastic talk with an architect in Perth a couple of years ago who was a sensory architect who predominantly worked in the aged care realm. One of the interesting factors that she told us at the time was that when you're looking at colour with aged care, obviously from a accreditation perspective, is always about that 30% ruling. So understanding that you have to have your LRV, your 30% differentiation between exit doors, you know, that typical thing. So it's especially with people with low viewing, or, you know, obviously anything to do with issues with eyesight, it's really important with that variation of that 30%. When it comes to physical colour, it's always about having something that makes people feel at home. So we would predominantly always go with the warmer palettes. The warmer palettes make people feel more at home, more, I suppose, welcomed, invited. You know, from a perspective of purely how the emotional connection is, that's what we would normally see in aged care homes. And we've noticed just from our colour awards over the last few years how different architects and designers look at palettes for aged care now. They're a lot more how we would actually do our home personally. They're not, you know, going to the old pastels and, you know, doing the, you know, soft pinks and blues that we saw probably 20 years ago. Things have changed. It really is. You see a lot more neutral colours and really beautiful accessories, still obviously adhering to all of the materials that you have to use in aged care for functionality, but there's some really beautiful things that are available now in that space, and we really can make it a beautiful environment for those people, still adhering to that 30% ruling for exits and visual, to make sure that they obviously understand where exit doors are and stuff. And there has been a lot of study on dementia and Alzheimer's as far as how do you make sure that someone understands it's their room when everything looks the same, you know, every door looks the same. And I have seen some great examples of, you know, in some aged care homes where they have, you know, like the start of an Alice in Wonderland door on one door. So someone can automatically see that that's their door. So you have to, there's still variances that you can do, but still keep it safe.
One thing that struck me as very strange during your presentation, you talked about being incredibly open with the composition of your colour palette. Now, in the world of litigation and protecting intellectual property, how do you stop your competitors from replicating your products?
This is a big issue in paint, unfortunately, because, you know, I mean, we can match to colours in all of the brands pretty much. I think it's just about quality, and obviously Dulux quality has always been renowned. Also our support as well in the architectural industry. You know, we are always there for our architects, and whether it's online, whether it's on the phone, or whether it's in person when we can be, I think the support is probably the most part. And we have a fantastic colour atlas. So we are the only paint company in the world for Australia and New Zealand to actually have a colour atlas. And the way that our colour atlas is derived, every colour was done from one drawdown, and then we did tones and variants exactly half of a half from there up into the shades. So it is a scientific masterpiece, it really is. And it obviously was derived many years ago from the master palette. But as we've gone through, probably we went from master palette to specifier, specifier 1, specifier 2, and now we're watercolour and watercolour 2. We have even bettered it from the original master palette. So there's a lot to be said about using colour in that particular tool. It is a really fantastic tool.
So let's quickly talk about the Dulux Atlas then, Andrea. Where can we get the Dulux Atlas from? Online and also obviously in the flesh?
Correct. So the Dulux Colour Atlas is the Dulux online shop. Obviously on the specifier shop you can purchase the Atlas. Now thinking about the cost, it's a very small cost considering the level of intellectual property that goes into that piece. So we only sell the Atlas for how much it physically costs us to physically manufacture it. We never put any of the costs at its cost for all the research, all of the colour work that's gone on behind the scenes. None of that is included. It's purely just the manufacturing cost of that Atlas. And once again, once you have the Atlas, you'll never look back. It's an amazing tool. We do have it online as well for those that can't physically have an Atlas in their space, or maybe they're happy to use the smaller version, which is our fan deck, which still has 2,800 colours in it. But the online version, obviously you can still get A4s of all of those colours as well. So, we do cater in both realms, because we know from the fan decks are very easy to use on site, especially if you're going into the big, high-rise sites. You can't carry a big Atlas around. We understand that. But the importance is when you get back to your office and you can open it up at your desk, you've got an idea from the fan deck of where you should start, and then you can just sort of really hone in on what you're, looking at for that particular property.
A question from one of the viewers online. In terms of Australia, do we have a distinct colour palette or theme, that's different to anywhere else in the world? Is there colours that are used that are identifiably and understandably Australian on first glance?
It's a really interesting colour. I get this question a lot. It's amazing when you're talking about, even between cross Tasman with New Zealand and Australia, which we do actually have quite different colour palettes between the Tasman. But when you're looking at European colour versus Australian colour, yes, we do have a unique colour palette in that there's some particular colours that do not work here purely because of our light. So colours like, if you're going to use a soft lemon colour on the exterior here, you will not see that soft lemon colour. It will basically be splayed up to white very quickly, unless it's in pure shadow. In the European light, you can often see these colours, and even on those beautiful, whitewashed rendered walls, if they're, colourful in maybe a Nordic sort of city, because of their duller light, you can see the colour. So there's colours like that we would automatically steer away from, because we know they would just be washed out to nothing. There's other cultural perspective colour. So for an example, whenever we're looking at forecast colour, purples are a colour that we will only use here in very small portion if they're more chromatic, or what we do is we use them much more muted. So they're much more grade off if we're going to use them in a much wider or larger volume. So that is more a cultural thing. We tend to use more earthy colours in Australia, and more earthy to our environment as well. And it's the same in New Zealand.
Question from Mike on the chat. It's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to this, but what's exactly the difference between using a Dulux labelled premium paint and the standard trade quality paint when considering colour? What's the difference in the composition and the chemical makeup?
So the composition of the colour is the same. So the tints are the same. That doesn't change. It's really just the base of the product. So when you're talking about our premium, whenever we do our colour matches, they're always done in Dulux Wash and Wear and Dulux Weather Shield. So whenever we do our accuracy tests under our light boxes in our labs, that's what we use. We use our premium products. So even though our professional range on our trade side is an excellent quality paint, so the accuracy test has been done on our premium. So the colour will still be pretty good, but it's not going to be exactly the same.
Okay. And this is a little bit of a hypothetical question, and you may not have the answer, but we'll try, and you may well do. This is a burning question from Terence on the chat. And he says, how can we apply the theories about the perceptions of colour in design? So as architects, how can they embed those theories that we've learned today, the importance of colour and what it does to you? How can we put that into a build?
I think that the most important thing is really working with your clients, because as much as, we know a lot of this, and I'm sure a lot of architects watching today have really understood a lot of what I've been talking about, and they've probably had jobs where they've had issues because of these undertones that are coming through after the fact. And especially harder with new builds as well, because obviously, until physically people are in that space viewing that angle of the paint versus the bedhead or what have you, it's really hard for them to perceive how that colour will be visually viewed at. So I think mood boards are one of those things, are the most critical thing that is not only your selling tool, but it's also how the customer is viewing that actual colour. And it's also understanding that they know that depending on the light, it can vary, because colour is never stable. I think we've been led to believe that it's stable. It's not. Colour is a science. It will always change. And that's why I love it so much. It's such an amazing tool to work with, because it brings on its own life of its own, depending on the light, there's so many elements as we discussed today. So I think it's really, really important to, if you're doing an exterior, show the clients what those colours look like outside, if you can, if you've got that, means of doing that. Don't show them in direct sunlight, because that's not reality as well. You need to have a diffuse. So whenever you're looking at colour, it always has to be on a vertical axis, not a horizontal axis. Don't ever lay your board down flat. We talk about flat lays, but we should never have flat lays. We should have them on a vertical scale, because that's how light is diffused, on a vertical scale when it comes to paint. So really important, if you're looking at colour outside, try and be outside when you're showing people colour. Using those A4 samples, really great tool, because the perception on showing them a small colour chip versus a large A4 sample is mammoth to how they perceive that colour as well. So there's,
It's a great answer, and it's so fascinating. I've learned more about paint. I mean, talk about people watching paint dry. It is fascinating. There is so much to learn. I'm quite jealous of your escapades. I mean, just tell us, there are a lot of questions piling into the chat. I will continue to go through them. What's the most random place you've ever been, and what's the weirdest thing you've ever learned about paint or pigments or what makes up colour?
Oh, boy. Probably the most random place I've ever been is I went on a colour seminar in Bilbao in Spain. And I saw they've got this new industrial area, and they've obviously got the beautiful industrial buildings and everything. And they were trying to bring new life into where their sort of river area went. And I think seeing the old and the new together was quite an amazing experience, because you could see that grungy, weathered steel, rust, dilapidated buildings, old timbers rotting. And then you're seeing these beautiful, amazing modern buildings with incredible surface structures, and just the difference between colour was amazing. It really felt like you were old school, new school. Like it felt like we were, 200 years before, and then all of a sudden you're in the new world. And it was all in one area. So it was quite an experience.
In terms of going to Bunnings, going to Mitre 10, going to a hardware store, and I walk into the hardware store and I say, you know what, I need some Dulux Milton Moon, I'm repainting in my house. A question from Mike, and this is an interesting one. How accurate are those tinting machines? I've never had a problem with them. They've always been beautiful.
Yep.
But the accuracy of, you watch the drip of red go in and a drop of brown. Tell us about the accuracy of those machines.
Look, the accuracy is actually quite remarkable. You would be, and the way that paint is measured, or tints are measured, are by literally a drop. So when we hear a 0.25, So for an example, I can give you a colour example, Lexicon Quarter, which is our builder's white. Lexicon Quarter is just our vivid white in a can with a drop of black, pretty much. So when they measure that drop of black, it is literally a drop. So that's how much it goes down to. It's quite unique as far as a measuring system goes. And those automatic tint machines, which you obviously have seen in Bunnings, and they're all in our Dulux trade centres across the country as well, you'll find that they are amazing measurement tools. They really are. So we rarely, I suppose, especially with the automatic tints, because it's all based on that colour in our database, it's normally if we've had an issue with a colour because, you know, maybe there was a database issue, but ultimately, you know, they can't really do much wrong on these automatic tint machines now. They're pretty good.
That's great. That's very pleasing to know. I'll head down to Bunnings later on and get some Dulux paint. A question from a couple of people. Amy has asked the question about, in terms of sunlight, it affecting exterior paint. We know that sunlight fades everything, fabric, paint, wood, whatever it might be. If the sun then tends to lighten the colour over time, should architects be specifying a darker colour from the outset?
Not necessarily. So the way that our tint formulas work, so we are about one of the only companies that actually have our own tint system. So we have our Decorama tints, which is a Dulux tint system. And we put a lot of money into research a number of years ago to ensure that the fading system, so obviously colours will fade, and the darker the colours, the more that they will fade. Our colours will fade at the same variant. So when you have a red and a yellow together, for an example, the issue was, and you'll see it, especially if you're looking at countries around the world that don't have this sort of issue, these sort of tint systems, you will notice that maybe the yellow will be really, really faded and the red won't be as faded as much. And the beauty of is when your colours fade at the same rate, you don't notice the variation. So it's only when they fade at different perspectives. So for an example, you know, everyone knows Melbourne, as you're coming from the airport, you're going up the main Tullamarine Freeway and you've got that yellow sort of, I don't know, obelisk, I suppose, on that sort of angled point. Now that yellow years ago was not painted in Dulux and it faded in no time, I reckon 2 years. So they asked our protective coatings team, you know, can you please help us? We need to get this obviously to be a stable colour. So they really wanted the yellow because it was obviously a point of Melbourne. Now everyone's really familiar with that particular piece of artwork. And we came up with this colour, which was obviously a colour that's already ours, but the product, the rate of tint in our chromatic tinters is much less than a lot of other companies. So we're really proud of that because we spent a lot of money and a lot of time, years and years, in fact, creating these chromatic tint systems.
John says he's up in North Queensland, but he said, and everyone can see this on the chat, but he's used a deep purple colour on a west-facing wall up in North Queensland 15 years ago, fading minimal, Dulux paint used. I mean, there's the answer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions around schooling, preschool. We've had residential rest homes, etc. An easy question, hopefully. Colours, good for educational facilities to help the kids concentrate. What palettes should
absolutely, absolutely. And I think you've also got to understand is, you know, primary, you know, like preschool, primary school versus high school and universities, and they are very different means of education. So when you're talking about ELC, so early learning centres, you know, the preschool type environment, kindergartens, obviously colours stimulate the mind. So the more chromatic colours in smaller volume, because the issue is with more chromatic colours, they're also very tiring on the eyes as well. So you still don't want to overwhelm that space. It's always about small volume when you're talking chromatic colour, especially in a learning environment. One of the colours that is renowned to help provoke thought is orange. So orange is obviously a very strong focal colour as well. So it's a colour that we would automatically go to, such as a red as well. Orange is a colour that it does put us in a space of creativity. So it is a great colour to use in those environments, but because you've got different ways of using orange, you've obviously got your bright chromatic colours, you don't have to use orange in that realm. You can actually really make it quite muted, you know, colours, even like our beautiful warm colour like Orangeade, for an example, really rich orange, but it's not highly chromatic. Whereas we've got Bright Delight, which is quite a chromatic orange. There's ways of using these colours which will help from a connectivity perspective to what you're trying to project in that space. And things like calming colours in the classroom are really important. But maybe for the spaces, and a lot of schools now have these, you know, project spaces where you go out of the classroom and you have maybe the sofas where kids can sit down and, you know, creatively brainstorm and things like that. That's where you can really bring colour into the space. I've done a lot of schools over the last few years, and we always try and project more colour in those thought-provoking brainstorming areas rather than in the classroom where they've obviously got to be quite concentrated.
I'll make this last question because I know you've got your kids at the dinner table eating lunch, but in light of what you talked about colours ever-changing nature. Colour is an evolving beast. It's not a sort of pigment that retains exactly the same shade. So we're seeing a lot of architects use Corten steel. Obviously, there's a lot of rust coming in. People are utilising more sustainable elements, so a lot more ochres, and the Corten is becoming much more stylish in terms of in demand with clients. And obviously, Corten still changes over time. So together with that, and we'll make this the final question, how would you select a palette, maintain that, to sort of match that long-lasting aesthetic where you're working with natural and, you know, copper, Corten steel, whatever it might be, that changes over a period of time?
I talked about in my presentation the complex neutrals, and I think that is an area where a lot of architects and designers go to naturally anyway, because we see these colours in our environment anyway. They are very natural colours. And when I'm talking about these colours, I'm talking about your greys, your beiges, the greys that have warmth, so still in that greige realm as well. Very neutral colours. But I suppose the thing is, all of those all of those surface materials you're talking about will still have undertones as well. So even things like steel, would you believe, I have looked at steel for our powder coating area and looked at, you know, what colours go with particular steel. Steels even have different colours. So you still have to understand even the level of rust. So because rust, obviously, there's many different colours in rust. So there's still undertones even in the most natural materials. Timber's a perfect example. Timber, you can have grade off timber, you can have warm, rich mahoganies, you can have really dull, you know, Vic ash, you know, more on the yellow side. I mean, there's so many different colours in timber as well. So you still have to understand that every material you use has a colour. And whatever colour in paints you use with that natural material still has to work with those natural colours of undertones that they already have.
That's great, thank you. Well, we're going to make that the final question, Andrea. You've been fantastic. I've learned so much. I know our members have learned an incredible amount of fascinating insights into the world of colour, into the world of shadow. I'm going to reconsider redoing, as I am doing this house up, you know, just redoing the colour palette to make sure that there's light and shade in the right areas. So you have been a wealth of knowledge and information, and on behalf of all of our members at the Institute of Architects, we do thank you. Obviously, Dulux is a national corporate partner of the Australian Institute of Architects. You have been a partner with us for over 15 years, and we're very fortunate to have you in an exclusive arrangement as the only paint partner of the Institute, and we look forward to many more years, of course. And I do want to remind members that there is the privilege card available, and that's on our website, of course, and we can send out some information on that. Some of you have already received some information on that in the past 24 hours, but don't forget that you can get discounted rates on fantastic quality Dulux paint that will stand the test of time. So again, thank you so much, Andrea, for your presentation today. Andrea Lucena-Orr, the Colour and Communications Manager at Dulux, has been fantastic having you online. So thanks again. It's been just a brilliant session. So something a little bit different, a bit more colour today, which is great as we come out of isolation. It's good to get a bit of colour on and to talk about colour and the impact it can have on one's mood. So again, thank you so much to yourself and also to the wider team at Dulux. We know supporting you as well. Thanks very much for everybody else for tuning in today. It's been great to see all of our frequent leaners. I've been Michael Linke. I've been the General Manager here at the Institute of Architects. Thanks so much for joining me. We will, of course, be having another lean-in session on the same time, Thursday at 12 noon, so in 48 hours. We look forward to seeing you then. Until that time, stay safe, stay indoors, and we'll look forward to catching you up with you on Thursday. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.